Yo, my homies and goats. It's been a few days. I'm kind of excited. This whole video channel thing is kind of giving me something to get out of bed for in the morning. Just share stuff that's been rolling around in my head and my heart for a long time. And I'm really blessed and appreciative that there's been uh, a response. There haven't been as many comments as I anticipated. I figured I'd get lots of people telling me how the cow eats the cabbage, if you remember that old phrase. People tells me, what I got wrong and how I should have done it. And man, there's no end to those kinds of reactions to me in my life and my way of doing things. I'm self-taught on virtually everything, and that always leaves some quirks and eccentricities and deficiencies. So, anyway, today I want to talk to you about the subject of is validation valid? And I don't know how long this will be. Probably, too long. But anyway, I want to start with this uh, from Picasso, and I'm not going to quote it because I can't quote it without getting into my phone, which I'm using a recorder now. But Picasso said, "Meaning is finding your gift." And I think he actually kind of turned that around the other way, that finding your gift is life's meaning. Purpose, he said, is giving it away. So, again, pretty much the way he put it was, once you find your gift, giving away is your purpose. And I'm pretty sure I know what my gift is and what my purpose is. I uh, heard a long time ago the phrase "the gift of pain," and that on the surface that just sounds like such a idiotic concept, but in reality, I think it's real close to the heart of what this particular life is all about. Not our existence, but this thing that we call life, this thing that has a beginning and it has an end. Um, but in between, universally has difficulties, and that doesn't mean that's all there is, but it's a part of the puzzle. And some people more difficulties than others. I certainly didn't have the worst life, but I absolutely did not have the best life, especially in childhood. I've had some serious difficulties as an adult with various situations, but particularly in childhood, 15 of my first 19 years were in a war zone, and wasn't hot combat all the time, but it was frequent enough that there was no real safe place to relax. So my purpose in life is um, helping others profit through loss. I've experienced that. I never anticipated experience that. In fact, especially in the middle of that war zone I lived in for a number of years as a kid, I felt like I was singled out and picked on to be trashed by the world. And I was a pretty hopeless individual. So I want to help people profit from loss. I want to help them turn liabilities into assets and to turn negatives into positives. And again, I know that sounds trite and maybe even cliche, but the thing I want to remind you about cliches particularly is that usually there's a grain of truth. And I believe that in every hardship, I'm dead serious about this. I would stake my life on this. In every hardship, there's opportunity. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean opportunity for you. It may be opportunity for you to survive that and pass on the fortitude, the grace, the mercy, the supernatural sustenance, whatever it is that got you through that. It may be that that is so that you can pass that on to somebody who's in desperate need of that. But again, I'd stake my life on the idea that in every hardship, every difficulty, every crisis, every trauma, there is opportunity to help somebody. And the good news is, usually you get helped along the way. And it's absolutely validating when you see that that thing that you thought was going to destroy you didn't destroy you, but also when you get to the privilege of seeing that very thing be an encouragement, a source of strength and hope to somebody who's helpless and hopeless. So, what's it take to turn the negatives into positives, to turn the liabilities into assets? Well, the first thing is that you have to understand that we are relational beings. And so relationship is inextricably, unavoidably, inescapably, undeniably a part of the process. No man is an island. One of the phrases that I heard kicked around in a 12-step program that I used to take one of our kids to, one of our loaner babies to pretty frequently was, nobody gets well alone. And that is universally true. If you were able to fix yourself all by yourself, you wouldn't need to be fixed in the first place. You'd already be there. Unfortunately, sometimes when we overcome some of life's obstacles, it creates arrogance, it creates hubris, it creates self-sufficiency and pride, which really may get us over the hump with a immediate difficulty, addiction, whatever it happens to be, but it may sink our boat in the long run, because self-sufficiency really is another term for the idolatry of self. It's for self-godhood. And I don't know you, but I know you won't make a very good God. And I know I didn't, and I know I don't. And I still find myself attempting to be my own God pretty much on a daily basis, in some small things, some large things. But the first thing, again, to turn the negatives into positives is you've got to realize you're a relational being, and you need to find somebody to relate to. Now, that's not an easy thing to do. I talked to a young lady this morning in a drive-through window that I stumbled across one day last week, and she was having a very bad day. It was written all over her face. I could tell she'd been crying. And I had the opportunity to, and I don't want to go into details, but to encourage her a little bit. And it was the first time I had ever seen her. And it just so happened when I was back at the same drive-through window this morning getting my Diet Coke, she happened to be working the window, and her face was entirely different. And before she said anything, I said, "You're feeling better today, aren't you?" And she agreed and acknowledged that. And it was just such a privilege to be able to be a little bit of, the encouragement. And I still don't know what had her down the other day, but I'm just glad that, I got to be there and be a little bit of a old grandpa figure to that young lady in that moment. So again, we all need to find somebody that it's safe to relate to. And the reason I started to tell you about this young lady is I did mention to her my very favorite verse in the Bible, which I've never met anybody else that shares this as their favorite verse, but it's Psalm 27:10, which says, "When my father and my mother forsake me, the Lord will take me up." Now, you may be fortunate. Your mom and dad may be tremendous, and they may never be so bogged down in their own issues and problems and distractions and responsibilities that they drop the ball. But the fact is, sometime in your life, the very most fundamentally essential beings, the very beings who brought you in this life, are going to manifest their limitations. Maybe in big ways, maybe in small ways, but you're going to have a situation eventually where you want to lean on mom and dad, and they're not going to be available. Maybe because they passed, maybe because, again, they're just tripped up in their own things. Maybe just be a situation where, if they've got multiple kids like my parents did, sometimes it was, like herding cats and squirrels. The cats are going this way in 4 different directions, and the squirrels are going that way in 12 different directions. And that's kind of a miracle, because there were only 5 of us. So anyway, we need to find somebody in spite of that, in spite of the fact that all of us have experienced disappointment and betrayal and abandonment in a relationship. We need to look for a place. And I believe God will provide this place where we can find somebody that we can relate to. Somebody who doesn't understand every detail of who and what we are, but they understand enough. I've had people tell me before, "Well, you don't know how I feel." And I always agree to that. You're right. Nobody's ever had your exact experience. But I do know this: pain is pain. The difference is cause, duration, and intensity. And I can empathize with your pain even though I cannot fully identify with the source. And really, that's kind of at the heart of the question I'm asking: is validation valid? People need to know that someone besides themselves looks at their situation and sees how difficult that is. Some of the places you might look for that person are within your family. Ideally, that's where it should be. Ideally, again, that's what parents should be. Unfortunately, sometimes parents aren't equipped to do that, at least not entirely. A psychologist, a psychiatrist, a counselor, a 12-step program like Celebrate Recovery or Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, maybe a friend, maybe a pastor, maybe a small group leader in a church. There are lots of places where you might find that person, and the first person you come across that says, "Yeah, I'll listen," tread carefully, and don't anticipate that necessarily even one person is going to be the whole enchilada, the whole solution to your relational issues, your relational needs. Usually it takes, I'll agree with this, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, maybe as long as the village doesn't supplant the role of the parents. I don't want to get too political, but we need a community. And that community starts with one person that you let into your life, and the two of you become a community. And one of the greatest things in my life has been to see those situations where there's a person who has reached out a hand to pull someone along the path of life. And that person who is being pulled then reaches back behind them and finds somebody else to grasp hands with. And before long, you've got a community of people who are uplifting, encouraging, strengthening one another. So, how do you turn the negatives into positives? You find somebody, because you're a relational being who relates enough, they can validate your trauma, your pain, your disability, your disadvantage, the struggles that you have dealt with or are dealing with, or the combination, which is often the case. There are two things that you need to look for in that person beyond just basic trustworthiness. And none of us is perfectly trustworthy. All of us have days when we need somebody to pull us up, and we're not equipped on some days to pull someone else up. But the first requirement is that you need to find somebody who, and I've already alluded to it, validates your pain, your difficulty, your disadvantages, your trauma, your disabilities, the crisis that you were or are living through, somebody who sees that. The hazard is, in our culture, a lot of times that is as far as, I'm going to use this term very broadly, that's as far as counsel goes. I don't consider myself a counselor, but I consider myself someone who is on the path of growth. Don't grow as fast as I used to. Growth is a lot harder, it seems, the older you get, but I still want to grow. And in the process of growing, I want to bring somebody with me. Again, the first requirement is validation, but unfortunately, a lot of people find a measure of solace, and they find a sense of release. And sometimes the person who's experienced life's hardships doesn't really want to go beyond that. The hazard of that is that when all you get is validation of your pain, somebody who will weep with you, and that's a good thing to find somebody who will weep with you, but if that's all they'll do, then they're reinforcing a status that leaves you paralyzed. You don't need to be a victim. You have been victimized, but don't take on victim status, because you will dismiss yourself from the opportunity and the potential to turn that negative into a positive, to grow from it, and then to turn around and make that your life's meaning and your life's purpose, to share it with someone else. And I know I'm kind of beating the dead horse, but this is so antithetical to the way we view people helping in this day and time. I have been involved in the periphery, kind of the fringes of people helping in informal contexts a number of times in this life. And I'm saddened by the number of times that I see people helpers who fail to exercise the second requirement for actually helping somebody turn negatives into positive, turn those, again, liabilities into assets. And that is, at some point, if you really want to experience that transformation of the bad into the good in your life, somebody has got to challenge you to convert the worst into the best. Now, that doesn't mean the happiest. It doesn't mean the most joyful, for sure. But it means coming from the place where, instead of reacting to and adapting to life as a wounded animal and as a victim, you become a victor. You become somebody who knows that the worst did not kill you. But beyond that, not only did it not kill you, but it had meaning and purpose that you can begin to exercise in your life and to encourage and challenge and strengthen the lives of others. So the two requirements, real simply, are just to find someone uh, that you can trust to listen. And then find someone who, having heard and having empathized and having related to your loss, your pain, your hardship, challenges you, woos you, encourages you not to live in the fetal position, but to begin to exercise and to begin to take the very parts of you that are most wounded and see those as the very source of your strength. And I'm going to throw in a bonus. The third requirement, and if you're a person who hates churchianity as much as I do, please recognize the distinction between this that I'm sharing with you and just religious protocol or religious dogma. This is not dogma. This is what I've lived. That is my foundation for saying what I'm saying and believing that it has potential for at least some of you who will probably see this video. Jesus is bigger than everything that happened to you. I've alluded before to the fact that when I was 15 and I met Jesus, and I met him pretty much through a group of people who were living out that unconditional, just self-sacrificial, joyous love in one another's lives that I had heard about, but didn't really mesh with what I understood of a flawed religious system and the religious systems that I had encountered prior to that. There's a verse, and I've mentioned this before as well, Romans 8:28, that says, "And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose." And that verse just kept confronting me. It just popped up everywhere, it seemed, right after I became a believer in Jesus as my God and my Savior. And at first, it frustrated me because I thought, well, that certainly can't apply to what I've experienced in life. I rejoice now to tell you that I discovered that it is true of those things. And as I've said before, there are things I don't want to encounter again. I don't want to experience again. But I'm glad that I went through them once, because those are the very things, again, that give me context, that give me a foundation, that give me assurance that I have something to say that has potential to help those who are helpless and hopeless. There's a little test I want to give, and I may do another video on this sometime, probably a short, but there's a little test that I like to administer sometimes to people, and I don't want to hoodwink anybody. I don't want to entrap anybody, but if you're one of those people who's already familiar with Romans 8:28 and you say, yeah, I believe that, then I want to ask you this, and I'm glad you can't respond, but to me personally, but of course you could in the comments if you wanted to, but what's the worst thing that ever happened to you? Think about that a moment. What's the worst thing that ever happened to you? Does Romans 8:28 apply to that? All things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. And then, if your answer is yes, Romans 8:28 applies, that how are you using it to serve and encourage and strengthen and challenge and minister and uplift and build up other people? So, is validation valid? Yes, but it's the beginning of the journey, not the end. I remember a marquee I saw one time that said, "Feelings buried alive never die." Some people keep those things buried because they expect no validation, no empathy, no sympathy, no communion. They have no expectation whatsoever that if somebody could see in the brokenness of their heart and their life, that there would be any attempt even to comfort them. Good counsel starts with selfless friendship, with validation, with lovingly, aggressively listening to hear people's heartaches. But when the time is right, begin to woo them, begin to encourage them, begin to restore hope and challenge that the negatives can be turned into positives. I wish you well.